Hi, Jonathan Marks here today with Ron Kessler, Ph.D. Dr. Kessler is the McNeil Family Professor of Healthcare Policy at Harvard Medical School. He's the co-director of the World Health Organization's World Mental Health Survey Initiative, and he's a member of the National Academy of Medicine and the National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Kessler is going to be speaking at the annual meeting of APSAR, the American Professional Society of ADHD and Related Disorders, and that meeting is taking place January 15th to 17th. 2016, Dr. Kessler is going to be talking about a factor analysis about the structure of adult ADHD. How many people have this kind of disorder versus that kind of disorder? Can you tell us more about what you'll be presenting, Ron?
Sure, I'd be happy to. There's a lot of evidence to show that the structure of ADHD changes from childhood to adulthood. For many years, there was a widespread belief that ADHD kind of disappeared. People matured out of ADHD as they got into adulthood, and we know now that's not the case. But as we learn more and more about people who have ADHD as they age, we realize that what seemed to be the ADHD disappearing was really it transforming. The kinds of symptoms that people have changed. So the hyperactive and impulsive symptoms become less prominent. The inattentive symptoms become more prominent. Mm-hmm. And also we're coming to understand now they become more differentiated. So it's really that the symptoms become more of a spectrum of executive dysfunction than just inattentiveness. There's also some thinking that there might be another dimension that becomes important, and it's not just the cognitive part of the executive dysfunction, but some kind of emotional discontrol that looks somewhat different from hyperactivity or impulsivity in childhood. So we're interested in looking into that as a way of helping to refine the diagnostic criteria. As you know, in DSM-5 have just been put into place. We looked at the full set of adult ADHD symptoms in the DSM-5, which is the 9-AD and the 9-HD impulsive symptoms, in addition to about a roughly equal number of other symptoms that have been suggested by various experts as being indicative of adult ADHD that you don't see in kids. Mm-hmm. And again, most of these problems were things having to do with executive functioning, so trying to manage complex tasks and things that a person might do as an adult worker. You don't have that as a 12-year-old, And we also asked about emotional discontrol. When we did the exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis, we found very consistent structure across 3 surveys. We found clear evidence of a one dominant factor that was really not AD, but it was really this, again, the AD symptoms plus this broader array of executive dysfunction symptoms, not being able to finish tasks on time and juggling multiple tasks, and the kind of things that you and I and other people in the modern world have to, deal with all the time. Right. We found the hyperactivity factor, we found an impulsivity factor, and we found an emotional discontrol factor. And all 4 of those were very strongly correlated to having a diagnosis, meeting DSM-5 criteria. So we find that they're important, but it turns out that the emotional discontrol measures and the broader executive functioning measures that are not part of DSM-5 had associations with the diagnosis equally as strong as the symptoms that are part of DSM-5. So it's very clear that the symptoms that are used right now are really just a subset, a broader set of symptoms in the general population. So that's the first thing we found. And then we've done some other interesting things based on that, looking at the profiles of people. What are the kinds of symptoms that seem to be dominant? Is there any evidence to suggest that there's a broader spectrum of ADHD where people who don't quite meet DSM criteria had a large set of other items that seem to be in the same spectrum that are being missed, and so forth. But that's the basic idea of the analysis.
So Ron, let me ask a question about this. We have DSM-5, which is like the physician's desk manual for what is classified as ADHD and what is not ADHD. You're finding new associations. What do practitioners do with that before DSM-6 comes out? How does this spread into the population of practitioners who are trying to correctly diagnose people?
Sure. Is it useful or not? You're right that one big purpose of this is forward thinking for DSM-6, which is now quite a ways off since we just started with DSM-5.
Yes.
But it's important to get straight what the nature of the beast is that you're trying to get hold of. So we hope that over the next few years, our looking at these data on the structure of adult ADHD to be the foundation for deeper studies that help us flesh out subtypes that maybe are more meaningful in adulthood than in childhood. But for the right now part, what we're finding is that even when a person meets criteria for adult ADHD, according to the current criteria, and as it happens, the vast majority of the people who have something that looks like it's a meaningful broad ADHD syndrome, according to this set of symptoms that we assess, do meet DSM-5 criteria. The things that are the symptoms in DSM-5 might not be the presenting complaints.
Yes.
They don't come into a doctor and say, gee, I have a problem with things, sort of half of them are impulsive, hyperactive kind of things, and the things that are inattentive are very often kind of kid-oriented. It might be that it's easier to pick up on the syndrome by asking about things that are not current DSM-5 symptoms. So in terms of screening, the ability to find people who have a problem, who don't realize it, get them into treatment that could be helpful and improve the quality of their life, could be improved by us being able to have a better understanding of what the real life problem is. Because of this, one of the spin-offs of this analysis is that Len Adler and I and Tom Spencer are working on a revision of the ASRS that is broadening the set of questions to include this executive functioning set of questions to see if there's a more diagnostic set of questions that we could pull out that would help us identify people better. And then the future-oriented part, Steve Ferrone is working with Len and Tom and I as well on that piece, looking at the structural aspects and trying to get some sense of should we, in clinical research studies, be probing a little bit more deeply for subtypes where it might make sense to think of differential treatment response or heterogeneity of treatment response as a function of differences in symptom profiles in ways that we hadn't before. So the most notable is that all this emotional discontrol set of symptoms doesn't seem to be as distinct from the executive dysfunction problems as AD and HD are in childhood, where there's some kids who are really hyperactive kids. Yes. And you see that's really the main presentation. You don't find many emotional discontrol main presentation people, but it turns out that those kind of emotional things are more prominent in adulthood than we had previously thought when we were looking only at hyperactivity and impulsivity. So if you sort of think of the original way of thinking of things as adults are just tall kids, there's this AD part and there's this HD part. We've always known that AD was more prominent, but we now know it's broader too. It's really not AD, it's executive dysfunction. And that's a sort of a richer, more variegated kind of problem. And instead of it being hyperactive impulsive, it's really hyperactive impulsive and emotional discontrol, where you don't see so much hyperactivity impulsivity as the sort of more subtle kinds of emotional discontrol things. And there are a lot of people as adults who have what you would think of as a combined type as opposed to a pure executive dysfunction problem. But you don't see this combined aspect of it if all you do is focus on the impulsivity and hyperactivity, which is not really there very much, and you miss the fact that there's the more subtle emotional discontrol piece.
So ADHD was originally kind of described in the early 1900s, and here we are 100 years later, and you're still underlining how new this science is, aren't you?
There are a lot of things like this where notions get carved in stone, and as a result of that, there are things that are not terribly difficult to study if you look at them, but just never get looked at. And because for so many years there was this notion that ADHD was a thing of childhood and that was the end of it, we never looked. Now that we're getting to the point where, a number of years ago now, where some people start coming back to their old pediatrician in their 20s and saying, hey, doc, I still need some of that medication, right, that we started seeing this going on. And now we're starting to look more closely and realize it's a rich and complex and highly comorbid condition that really makes a difference to people's lives. And, you know, we've known for quite some time that having ADHD as a kid is a predictor of other kind of emotional problems in adulthood, depression, anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, and so forth. But we're now coming to realize that it's also a risk factor for this broader and subtler ADHD variant that we hadn't recognized until recently. And then once we see that more clearly we have in the past, it could well be that treatment options present themselves that we hadn't appreciated before, and that, of course, is the holy grail for this moving forward.
Ron Kessler, thank you so much for being with us today. Ron's going to be presenting at the annual meeting of APSARD, the 7th annual meeting, the American Professional Society for ADHD and Related Disorders, this coming January 15th to 17th, 2016 in Washington, D.C. Ron, thanks again for being with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for talking to me.